This program you're about to see is one in a series of programs that we've prepared for you, which we hope will be very fascinating and illuminates this period of human development.
You're perfectly, perfectly you.
Oh my God. Oh, baby. Oh my God, it did it. Oh my God.
Look at that baby, sweetie.
Birth is both a miracle and a common experience shared by each one of us. It is our gateway into the human family and forms our first impressions about being here. While we acknowledge the momentous physical challenges of pregnancy and birth, what are the possible psychological implications for mother and child? Pre- and perinatal psychology is the study of the psychological impact of experiences from conception through gestation, birth, and bonding for the baby and the mother. The awareness that infants are conscious and learning during these stages and are encoding those lessons are ideas far from the mainstream.
A child's personality is molded during the first 9 months in utero, probably more than at any subsequent period in his or her life. Prenatal communication and prenatal bonding has to start right from conception on.
Many schools of psychiatry, psychology, and medicine virtually ignore the possibility that pre- and perinatal experiences may contribute to later mental health problems.
We have to change a great deal of our system and humanize especially the obstetrical delivery room, the floor, and the care of the mother.
As a psychiatrist and as a physician, I sort of bought that myth that medicine has, which is there couldn't be any record of birth because the cortex of the newborn is not finished. It's not myelinized, as it is called. The neurons have the kind of fatty sheets, and that process is not completed in the newborn. Why there couldn't be any record of birth, which to me doesn't make any sense now, because we're talking about something that could be 20, 30, 40, 50 hours of a life-threatening situation. So there's a very complex organ, which is the brain of the newborn, and the idea that it couldn't record hours of this kind of emergency, it doesn't make any sense.
Mother Nature provides a stress hormone to help the baby make the transition from the womb out into the world. But what if mother and baby are exposed to excessive and avoidable stress and pushed beyond the limits of their ability to cope?
When a woman is stressed briefly, it's fine, not to worry. But if there is chronic, protracted stress, then what we have is a continuous bombardment of the brain by these noradrenaline, cortisone, all these stress hormones.
When a woman is not supported and people leave, they have to, the medical caregivers often have other people to take care of, a woman can actually go much more in a frightened state, a more high-stress state, if she is not continually supported. And with that fear, the stress hormones come in and tighten everything up.
Is it possible to bring encoded old survival memories into conscious awareness so we may be released from their recurring damage in present time? We will hear the stories of people who participated in experiential therapy using guided imagery and self-hypnosis to access their earliest memories. Bob Hansen, a former software consultant and accomplished woodworker, attended an experiential therapy workshop with his wife Susan. What he discovered there during a therapy session around his birth changed his life.
I came up with 9 pages of written recollection afterwards about all of the details of where I went and what I was feeling and what I was thinking along the way. It took me by surprise because Perhaps more than anything, the recollections that I had seemed so real and palpable, as though it was not just a fabrication of my mind, but that it had actually happened.
Bob's mother's womb was a happy place for him. His mother wanted a natural childbirth, adamant that she did not want drugs. But at his birth, Bob presented as a breech, and his mother, who couldn't stop her contractions, was given anesthesia. In the guided imagery around his birth, Bob recalls vividly his memory in utero of the moment his mother was given drugs.
Suddenly it felt as though there was a poison or a fear or some sort of anger. It actually caused my body to clutch up. And it was very tight feeling. Imagine tightening every muscle you possibly can. And then relaxing for a little bit and trying to move more, trying to get out more. And then all of a sudden clutching up again as though another wave of this fear, this poison hit me. Then the next real distinct recollection I had was that I was being held back, that something was preventing me from actually coming out.
After returning from the workshop, Bob invited his mother over for dinner.
I asked her to describe the actual circumstances of my birth, and did not ask her any questions or lead her along. I just asked her to pretty much recite everything she knew. As she was speaking, I had to sort of bite a knuckle. It was incredible how much what she told me corroborated to what I experienced in the regression. As I look at the major points of my regression experience, having gone in there cold with no previously conceived notion of what my birth was all about, and thinking of 6, 7, 8 major points during that regression, and then to have each one of those collaborated by my mother just absolutely blew me away. I don't like the feeling of being held back. I don't like when somebody impedes my progress. I was going to do things certain ways, my way, and don't stand in my way because I'll go right through you. At least now when I see a weak point, I can almost trace it back to something that happened either during my birth or shortly after or in my childhood and say, well, perhaps there's an explanation for why I'm behaving that way now. And with that realization, you're able to move beyond that and learn a different way of behaving instead of just being trapped by angers or fears or other things that are just ingrained reactions from the past.
Infants don't have the verbal skills to communicate their womb and birth experiences. So how can we be so sure of its impact later in life?
For a long time, we have observed clinically how people act and then made certain conclusions based on those behaviors. But we have really not understood what happens on a biological level. One of the principles of pre- and perinatal psychology is there is no separation between the mind and the body. And therefore, whatever happens, let's say, between you and me on a psychological level at this moment is immediately translated into changes in biology.
A baby's experience in utero and birth is somehow encoded in the baby's memory to be later expressed at the intellectual or emotional level as adults in our perceptions, attitudes, behaviors, and our sense of self. There is startling new scientific evidence supporting the bond between biology and psychology. According to Stanford cellular biologist Dr. Bruce Lipton, parents select for their babies gene programs based on the parents' perceived beliefs about their environment. That environment, not genes, controls cells in a developing baby, a discovery which has the potential to rewrite the entire story of life.
The research that I was involved with cloning cells and studying their control mechanisms showed that it was actually the environment that switched the genes on and off. The genes were not capable of switching themselves on and off. That's an assumption that we've had for a long time and propagated to now it's a belief that genes control. The cells in your body can always adjust to what's going on in the environment. So in reality,
Lipton's finding refutes Charles Darwin's genetic determinism, the idea that at the moment of fertilization between egg and sperm, a child's patterns are set in concrete.
We always talk about the nutrients that cross the placenta. But the reality is the blood contains a lot more than just nutrients. It contains a lot of organizing chemicals that organize the body's structure and its function, hormones, for example. The mother's informational molecules in her blood are also accessible to the developing fetus, so that signals in her system are involved with switching genes in the child's system. The original concept that the child unfolds according to a pre-scheduled genetic code is a false assumption. The truth is the child is dynamically adapting to the environment, but the environment perceived by the mother. When we talk about human perception, you're talking about the community's perception. But at the level of cells, there's perception because a cell must read its environment. It has to interact with it. The cells use receptors, like we have receptors, like eyes and ears and nose. So it perceives the environment through these receptors, and the receptors relay the information to the genes.
If birth is happening in a noisy hospital, and hospitals have associations with disease and pain and death anyway, that it unnecessarily activates that catecholamine system at the expense of the other system that would create bonding and sort of foundations of loving behavior and trust to humans and so on.
This is a time when a mother's own birth might be triggered that she really knew nothing about, or maybe she heard stories.
The hospital practices that we're presently developed and we're using now for both mother and baby do not fit the physiology of either the mother or the baby, and we're in the process of changing them.
Drugs, forceps, prematurity, isolation and separation from the mother may contribute to later problems in childhood, as they are believed to provoke fear and hypervigilance in the developing fetus and infant. Today, more than 20% of births in hospitals are by surgery in the form of cesarean section, an unacknowledged source of stress to the baby.
If a mother has a woman caregiver, skilled woman caregiver during labor, and that woman's C-section rate goes down in half, the length of labor is shortened by 25%, and other complications needing forceps, needing a vacuum, pain medicine, with the mother choosing whether she has the pain medicine, is markedly decreased.
All the studies all over the world show that the average rate, necessary rate of cesarean section should be no more than 5 to 6%. Anything beyond that is just unnecessary surgery. Generally speaking, children who have been born cesarean will have a much greater need for body contact than children born vaginally.
Positive pre- and perinatal experiences can leave the infant with imprints of optimism and trust. Babies seem to respond to love by thriving, in many cases against great odds.
Let's catch Daddy and Big Brother.
During their pregnancy with triplets, Cheryl and Fritz Seaman bonded with their babies, whom they believed were conscious and learning while in her womb. Cheryl, already the mother of 16-year-old Riley, believed a proactive approach to her pregnancy would benefit her children down the road in untold ways.
I became their advocate. I was the one who ultimately was going to be responsible for bringing them into the world. I had a midwife that followed me as well as an OBGYN. And then when it came time to give birth, I had a doula, someone who comes in and is just there for me.
When a woman is in labor, there's no turning back. And having that kind of continuous support gives her a sense of being safe, of being reassured, of knowing that she won't be left alone, and that somebody is there to provide the kind of support that she needs.
Since delivering multiples is labeled a high-risk procedure, Cheryl decided to deliver in a hospital familiar with multiples. Still, she was not willing to allow medical intervention to overwhelm the human aspects of delivering her babies.
I wanted to do everything medically possible to make sure that my children were healthy and well when they were born. When I went to my doctor, I told him I had a very particular way I wanted to go about my pregnancy. Fortunately, he's somebody who can take direction from his patients, and he was, I just said, this is my pregnancy, and my husband and I will be involved every step of the way.
I kept the peace, tried to keep a steady, calm atmosphere and keep those guys in as long as we could. Because my understanding was emotional distress could make them come out sooner.
She did all she could do to will herself to have a good outcome, and that goes a long way because she understood that with any multiple gestation, the trick is to carry the pregnancy as far as humanly possible.
This is our pregnancy. These are our children. And you don't do anything until you tell us why, unless it's a matter of life and death.
Cheryl delivered 3 healthy, strong boys, all weighing over 4 pounds. So healthy, the triplets were never placed in an incubator or in a neonatal intensive care unit. And to avoid a disruption in the bonding process, all 3 boys stayed in the room with Cheryl during her short hospital stay.
I made sure that they were always with somebody that loved them deeply and understood that bond. Children respond to love, and they respond to touch, and they respond to attachment.
In a first for the hospital, Joyner, Russell, and Aiden went home with Mom, Dad, and Big Brother just 3 days after being born.
How we treat the mother and the father has that metaphor of an effect, a cascade of effect, if you will, is how they then treat their baby and has effect, I think, in the culture.
That mother who is nurtured is different with her baby 6 weeks later and 8 weeks later. 6 weeks later, she's significantly less depressed. She has higher self-esteem. She begins to feel the baby is hers on the 3rd day rather than the 9th day in the controls. So she's a different mother, possibly for the rest of her life with that baby.
Bonding after birth is nature's way of ensuring an infant's survival through safety and love. Elements required for bonding include skin-to-skin touch, eye contact, and soothing sounds. If bonding has been interrupted for any reason, such as birth trauma, death of the mother in childbirth, or if an infant is given up for adoption, there are later opportunities for the infant to feel safe and develop healthy attachment to a primary caregiver.
Attachment is a deep and enduring relationship that affects everything. It affects the body, the mind, the social experience, and emotional experience. It's also a very natural experience. The human infant seeks attachment. Attachment is a reciprocal relationship. So if the mother can't recognize the cues that are coming from the baby, looking into the mother's eyes, how they just gaze at each other, the mother and the child, that's an attachment exercise. That is an attachment cue that's happening.
Right now, 70 to maybe as much as 90% of women going into a labor room will get an epidural, which is a form of spinal, which paralyzes them from the waist down or even higher, so that they actually have no experience of birthing. Everything we do in childbirth education in this country is designed for labor. We don't teach people to have babies, we teach them to have labor.
If for many hours somehow the child is confronted with a situation where there is pain, there is tremendous fear, there is choking and so on, it generates a lot of kind of amorphous biological fury. And it seems to stay in the organism. So when we do regressive work, we see people reliving birth and bringing up enormous amount of aggression and sort of violent images and so on.
During her experiential therapy, Lisa Steranko, an interior designer from New Jersey, relived her agonizing birth, which she almost didn't survive.
One of the nurses took notice that I was actually coming out, and when she saw my head, she took it and I guess she pushed it back in, but my mom said she could see her twist it, kind of like a jar. And then she took my mom's legs and she crossed them.
It is possible Lisa came close to suffocating while traveling down the birth canal.
When there's a sensation of like being trapped, that's like a word that always comes to my mind. I like literally can see the word. If I ever feel trapped, it's like complete anxiety, like almost takes over me. My lungs, I could feel everything was all squinched up. I couldn't breathe at all. Everything felt like squished. I couldn't do anything with my arms to I was stuck. There was no way to defend myself. Certainly, I've had a lot of fear about giving birth. I always have. And I definitely have the fear of something happening to the child and what would go on with that. Because I don't think I trust the process really that much. Even though I know it's natural and it's supposed to be, there's certainly a part of me that has a fear that something could easily go wrong. Obviously, I'm sure because of what I lived through. It gives you your first opinion about the planet and what you're up against. It's like the first opinion you form about what you're fixing to face for the next X amount of years that you're put here. But when I actually experience the helplessness and the fighting and the struggling and the not being able to breathe, certainly there's like an amazing amount of clarity and a lot that goes along with that, because, you know, you're there and you understand so much more when you can relive it.
We were born anatomically, we got out, but we really haven't been born emotionally. We still carry in our unconscious sort of an incomplete pattern of birth. And it really makes a big difference if we can bring it fully into consciousness and integrate that. The quality of life changes, you know, significantly. Typically, emotional and psychosomatic problems have deeper roots in the memory of birth, and they're related to different stages or different aspects of the birth process. Claustrophobia would be related to the beginning of the birth process, where the womb is actually closing in.
A Harvard study found that the average person sees 10 medical doctors prior to being given an anxiety order diagnosis. And the National Institute of Mental Health reports close to 20 million Americans have a phobia or anxiety disorder of some type. Other common afflictions such as eating disorders and drug and alcohol abuse have all been correlated with and maybe directly related to negative experiences in the pre- and perinatal periods.
Breathing difficulties like asthma, for example, always have source in birth.
Repeated stress in the mother is passed along to the fetus and causes anxiety, which leads away from growth towards protection and may have significant long-term emotional and physical consequences.
Mother's belief about her vision of the environment, if she sees that it's a threatening environment, an environment that doesn't encourage the survival of either her or her fetus, then that information is relayed to the fetus. And the relevance is very clear on the genes what the relevance is. When in protection, the organism walls itself off from the environment. That's part of a protection response, to protect it from the threatening, noxious environment. If I'm in a growth-promoting environment, my visceral organs are encouraged to function. Liver, stomach, respiration, heart, all of these, because they provide for the growth and maintenance of my body. And when we get under stress, the first thing that happens is we shut down visceral functions to conserve energy and then push the energy in the blood into the muscles for running or fighting or whatever you might have to do. The significance in regard to embryological development is the organs in the embryo and the tissues in the embryo are nourished by the blood of the fetus. The more blood an organ or tissue gets, the more developed it becomes during fetal development. And the converse is true as well. If the mother is under a stressful situation, her adrenal hormones are going to cause the blood from her visceral region to go to her muscles and bones to get in a fight or flight situation. But those same hormones cross the placenta. And when they cross the placenta, they change the blood flow in the fetus because the fetus will mimic what the mother is doing. We look at the fetus affected by the same hormones. Relevance. Then a continued stress, you deplete the amount of blood going to the forebrain, which is intelligence, and increase the development of the hindbrain, which is reflex behavior. It has now been demonstrated that somewhere between 40 to 50% of the potential IQ of a child can be affected by the prenatal environment. So under a stressful situation, a child can lose perhaps up to 50% of the available potential IQ it could express. If child rearing practices become worse and worse over time, it just says that every generation will have practices that are not supportive of life in this whole unfolding. And so therefore, it's a propagation from one generation to the next.
What do you see, huh? What do you see?
Ann Curtis, the mother of 4 sons, unsuccessfully battled depression her entire life. Unable to get relief from conventional therapy, Ann pursued therapy centered around her birth.
I knew very little about it. It had never occurred to me to even think about my birth.
Ann's therapy around her birth allowed her to identify and release emotions she had held on to for a lifetime, which she believes led to her depression.
As I was coming down the canal, I realized that I wasn't getting any help from my mother at all. And the thought was, I'm just going to die. I can't do this on my own. And I can remember just lying there and crying and crying.
After her birth work, Ann learned that her mother had been told by her physician that carrying another child might kill her.
So I realized that this fear that I had been experiencing was my mother's fear. It was not mine, anything that had to do with me, so much as the fear that you had experienced all through those months. This is not anything about blame of my parents. They were doing what they knew how to do. It's a way for me to understand why I was having this reaction, adverse and negative reaction to life. I was terrified if I didn't trust people.
Ann was concerned how her depression while pregnant with her sons might have affected them.
I parented them exactly the way I had been parented, which was assuming the responsibility of feeding them and keeping them clean, but I didn't have much nurturing. I didn't know what that was.
Ann was determined to not let her own birth leave a mark on the next generation. With Ann's support, 2 of her 4 sons have done experiential therapy around their own births.
I have experienced love, what it's like to truly love other people. It's a very strong feeling in me now, and I can honestly say that was too scary for me before.
Hey there, what are you doing? What are you doing? Yeah.
How can we utilize the best of technology and science without violating the mammalian laws of nature? Are we compromising the biological wisdom of mother and child with too much interference at delivery?
Almost all of those that receive an epidural are going to end up with an interference of some sort, i.e. they're going to have an IV with Pitocin to make the uterus come back and start working again. They end up not being able to push the baby out unless they let the epidural wear off.
If we can just go back as much as possible to normal, natural, non-interventionist birth, that would be the absolutely best way to be born, all things being equal. I mean, obviously, in some cases, you need medical intervention.
A natural, non-traumatic vaginal delivery can give a baby a head start in life.
That baby has a very good idea of its body boundaries. It sort of knows about its body because it has been touched along every point of his body. Also, from a psychological standpoint, that baby has the feeling that I have made this on my own, okay? This is like my world, and here I come.
Karen Buck, a statistician, has struggled throughout her lifetime to form relationships and complete things, a pattern she thinks originated in her birth.
She was drugged in the way that she had an epidural. So my experience of that was that there was nobody there. So that when I revisited the experience of birth, it was one of total struggle. I remember the experience of being crushed, there being no place to go. It was killing my neck. And it made me really, really, really angry. Afterwards, I remember thinking, that's why I've been angry. It kind of carried around anger for years, and I would snap at people out of proportion to what I was really angry at them about. As a toddler, like before I had words, that was my attitude. Get away, I'm doing it myself. I wouldn't let my mother comfort me or be with me. A lot of the pain for me was right near the end of the birth experience. That left an imprint for me that if I get to the end, pain will come. So I've had a horrible time completing things. has cost me connection to human beings. It has been nice in a way to be so self-reliant, you know, but I've missed out on people. Birth was not something we did together, it was something I struggled with. I experience her as totally not being there. In life, I still have a hole in my heart that I don't have that connection with her. And like all of us, I need my mom. And my hope and my vision, actually, is that we're going to make it.
Some people have serious problems with their mothers. They trace it back. If they have the opportunity for intense regressive work, they find out that not everything that's happening between them and their mothers in the relationship can be explained from what the mother did to them postnatally. And it could be very liberating because they recognize that that part of the difficulty in the relationship is very impersonal. It's not that the mother did something to them in a situation where she had a choice.
Do you remember before that? When you were actually in Mommy's belly? You do remember that? And what do you remember? We were reading a book and then we were talking and I said, Locke, do you remember anything about being in Mommy's tummy? And she said, cookies. And then I said, a few minutes later, I said, do you remember anything else? She said, chocolate. And then I asked her a few minutes later, because I was a little bit astonished, and she said, mint. And I about lost it because in the 8th month of my pregnancy, my husband was away, and I would go downstairs to do the laundry in the basement, and in the basement was a refrigerator, and we had bought a case of Girl Scout Thin Mints. And I would go down there and eat a half a sleeve every time I went to do a laundry. I couldn't believe that she remembered that because I was embarrassed about it, so I never told anybody that I did that. Girl power.
Boy power.
At the very end, she was breech. And I didn't know whether or not it was a girl or a boy because we didn't have that test done, but I was very apprehensive about having a girl because I have a strained relationship with my mother. I went to this man who did some massage and he asked me some questions about it because I did tell him, because I walked in and I told him I'm concerned because my baby's breech and I don't want to have a cesarean, I want to have a natural birth. I didn't use any medicine the first time and didn't want to the second time. And he said, well, what you need to do, you need to tell this baby that if in fact she is a girl, that you want her to come into this world and that your reservations have nothing to do with her. That's about your relationship with your own mother and not with her. I did that and I went home that afternoon and by that evening she had turned around because I felt her kicking at the top of my stomach. I was very conscious about making sure that she had an easy birth. I used a midwife. I had planned it out so that the lights would be low and I wouldn't have to use drugs, and I'd have some music that I had chosen. I just think that she is comfortable in her skin. I think she knows or knew that she was welcome, and it took some getting to on my part. And once I got there, the birth was beautiful and it happened easily and quickly. It was an hour. And and I see it now because she's so bright and she's quick.
And will Locke's experience down the road be a mirror reflection of her birth?
They're not real, they're for decoration.
Do children and eventually society pay too high a toll when the psychology of birth is ignored?
There are a number of behaviors, manifestations that we see with people who haven't been able to attach properly. Violence is at one extreme, and it isn't the most common.
When we look at, for example, behavior problems in children, it is much too late to start looking at them when they're 5 years old or 6 years old. These behavior problems may in fact have started before they were even born.
Kevin Jones, a diversity counselor from Oregon, came close to death during his birth.
I was born with the umbilical cord around my throat. I was born blue or dead, actually, in that they took me away from her for 48 hours. Before I did this work, I would go into a cave, for example, and I would panic. I would just completely freak out. It was like being claustrophobic.
Because the cord was wrapped around Kevin's neck, to move forward in the birth canal meant possible strangulation. But if he didn't move forward, he might never get out and die. This pattern of fear played out emotionally in his life and influenced his behavior.
I would feel paralyzed in terms of being able to do anything. I would get to a certain place, I'd get very excited, very motivated, and I would do something to move forward. And then something would happen. I would get depressed. And I never understood that. I would just stop.
Kevin, as a young man, had hopes of becoming a classical guitarist.
I had the opportunity to play in this Broadway show in New York, Promises, Promises. And I just choked. See, I couldn't do it. I was scared to death. I panicked. I finally wound up doing it, but it was really a scary experience for me. And I remember just feeling paralyzed and making a lot of mistakes. It explained a lot about why I couldn't move forward. What was stopping me? I used to beat myself up a lot. I used to say, "What's wrong with me?" Yeah, that was always the voice, what's wrong with me? There's nothing there. I am not defective. I'm not mentally ill. I'm not crazy. I'm not screwed up. I just have this experience that was real. It may not seem like it now. But I feel very much freed up from it. A lot of slack around. When I still, that feeling of stuckness, it still comes up, I feel that chokeness, but I can, pull it off, I can say, oh, that's what that was, and move forward through it. I've committed myself to really finishing learning how to play guitar in the way that I want to play, and I feel like I can do that. I've been able to look at racism also in a different way too, in that I just assumed that I was always going to have a hard time as a black man, and that there's nothing I could do about that either. And that even though racism does exist, and sometimes I do catch hell, it doesn't stop me like it used to. I see that whole birth experience as an incredible teacher for me, as being able to channel that energy and see that maybe that was the way it was supposed to be. And I would imagine that there are a lot of people that go through something like that and don't know about it. They don't even know that birth trauma is still with them. I can imagine there are probably people in prisons or people that are deeply depressed that have given up on themselves because there's something in them that says you can't do it, or stop before you die, or whatever. And I can imagine that if they just knew what I know about that, if they got a little taste of that, just a little bit, and freed up from that their life would change forever.
Do nice stuff. Nice. Oh.
Our old belief system was genes are like concrete. They're poured at the day of fertilization of the egg by the sperm. They're set. They unfold in a predetermined manner. They express themselves in a predetermined manner. And that is an incorrect belief. Totally incorrect. Because the genes are dynamic. They change on a daily basis as necessary because it is what keeps you alive. So the concept of genetic determinism may be nothing more than belief determinism.
This is a tiny little human being who is laying down memories. So you have to relate to that child even before he or she is born.
The baby is not just a blank slate. The baby comes fully connected, affectively, emotionally, and responsively to the parents. And I think that these words and this care has long-lasting impact.
This is a sensitive period for the mother, and our words have great power. And it's going to be hard to explain this to the doctors and nurses who are so involved in other areas. It's going to be hard to have them appreciate the significance of this new and important finding.
I hope that sooner or later, the kinds of things that we have observed and we have experienced will sort of penetrate into mainstream. It seems that more and more people are interested in this, although it doesn't seem very convincing, because psychiatry seems to be going exactly in the other direction. Tremendous emphasis on drugs, where suppressing symptoms is confused with healing and therapy.
Are we, in our rush toward technology, in danger of violating ancient mammalian principles of birthing and caring for our young? Have the loud and ever-present voices of the intellect dulled our ability to listen to our hearts? Do we inadvertently and tragically program our children to do the same? Research now shows the developing infant before, during, and after birth to be a conscious, exquisitely sensitive and learning being in a dynamic interchange with its environment. These early biological and psychological lessons color our views of the world and our place in it, creating lifelong patterns of fear or trust. We must somehow find a way to use the best of modern science without violating natural human needs, so we can create a better world for our children and for their children. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life star, hath had elsewhere its setting and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy.
Laura Uplinger is a visionary and a mother who has lived the vision she saw possible. Daughter of Brazilian diplomats, born in the U.S., raised in several countries, she traveled the world receiving a brilliant international education. For the past 35 years, she's focused her life upon the power that pregnant women everywhere have, if only they know it, to shape the mind and heart of their child through their inner life and imagination. Laura is a powerful and graciously outspoken advocate for the importance and lifelong significance of the time before birth, preparing our body, mind, spirit for a joy-filled conception, pregnancy, and life in the womb, the most natural possible birth, and full breastfeeding. She personally has taken this message to the slums of Rio de Janeiro, reminding women in dire poverty of their true strength, and she eloquently and viscerally reminds us that birth and the primal period, especially the mother-baby bond, is everybody's issue. She inspires us with leading-edge scientific knowledge, historical and current examples of what empowered women can do, and the intuitive knowing of all women. We women and men, she says, are the pioneers.
It's interesting, growing up in several nations, I could understand that we were all one. And this was before the New Age concept that we are all one. When I was in my early 20s, I was finishing university in experimental psychology I was at the Sorbonne at the time. Immediately afterwards, life brought me face to face with a fantastic universe of esoteric psychology. In that universe, I was not a graduate of anything. I was not even in a daycare center. I had everything to learn and embrace. I'm still doing it, and I'm in my 50s. But one of the very first teachings that I came across, and this was in the mid-70s, was that the imagination of a pregnant woman is all-powerful during pregnancy. I loved that concept. For me it was high philosophy, but it was a forbidden thinking as far as genetic determinism. Remember, in the 70s, the genes would do everything in the womb. The placenta was protecting the baby from things that were happening to the mother. And after birth, the tabula rasa birth, education would start. So here were a fabulous vein of understanding amongst old philosophical traditions that said, no, conception might be the very most important moment of your life. Pregnancy is a moment of utter power that women will never have again once the baby's born. Of course there will be the milk. Of course there will be society and teachers to educate that baby and bring forth what that baby needs. But in the making of every cell, of every tissue in the body of the mother, that's where the key is. I thought that science would take about 100 years to find out about all these important truths. And I dedicated my life to tell that, but backstage, to every pregnant woman I would meet. It was simple. I could do that. Was I in for a surprise? I was invited to work on psychosomatic medicine teams in a maternity ward in Brazil, an important one. Worked with extraordinary obstetricians. They were university teachers. Went up the slums of Brazil, of Rio, telling the mothers about the freedom they had to love their baby when the baby was still inside. And yes, the babies were receiving their thoughts. They loved it. When you tell somebody in a slum that they don't need to take any pill or buy anything, it's just the singing that they're dedicating to their baby in the womb is reaching the baby. It brought them great joy, and they taught me so much. And then I was wrong. It didn't take 100 years. It took about 10 years for biochemistry to be solidly established. And suddenly the placenta, instead of being an organ of protection to the baby, yes, protection against some big molecules perhaps, but it was instead an organ of transfer, almost like an amplifier. If I drink a cup of coffee, of course I'm Brazilian, if my baby is 20 times smaller than I am, my baby is drinking practically 20 cups of coffee. And then came cell biology, and now we have epigenetics. So the time is now, Suzanne. The time is now to tell every single woman on earth, every single government, that yes, pregnancy is a heightened time where women should be inspired and empowered to just weave a new civilization for our planet. Because look at civilization. We have warriors and warriors. Since the time of recorded history, more wars, more conflicts, more inner difficulties. We still have not brought brotherhood on earth. It has been preached by great ones, but we haven't done it. Why can't we give to our planet a better human material? Are we women responsible for the mediocrity of our civilizations? Well, yes, we are. Should we despair? No. We should embrace the understanding of this new power. It's a junction between gorgeous philosophies from the Vedas, but also from the Andes, and also from Brittany, some from Brazil. Like a marriage, a wedding between these gorgeous thoughts and now applied hardcore science. Joy, as far as biochemistry is concerned, would be the most perfect blood formula so that our organs are healthy. Well, for a pregnant woman, even more so. So I have dedicated my life to joy in pregnancy and the imagination of pregnant women. Now in Brazil, the natural birth movement is a huge movement. I am often one of their speakers, always being a proponent of the life of the baby inside. Now, I want to empower ladies, pregnant mothers, babies, but it goes both ways. What you do for a baby in the womb, you're also doing for the mother, and vice versa. This impacts parenting in ways that science will one day study. It's extraordinary. The time is now to contact our governments, our people in power, perhaps tap into their pride, say, be the first. We hear that in Congo it has already started. Governments looking at the health of the future generations, instead of repairing wounds, bring forth the possibilities for health. We are here to bring forth into matter, into our brain. You see, the gift of a healthy brain might be the best gift for a baby. And for a healthy brain, we start with a healthy couple. What takes a couple to conscious conception is something beautiful. But then in the history of my life, I had this opportunity. I had a companion. We conceived consciously. And I had that kind of pregnancy. Oh my goodness. It makes it so much interesting and easy. The adventure in parenting becomes much more daring and open and flourishing, blossoming. The level of authority when you are in front of your child, the child is 6 or 10 years old, and there's something that you need to step into, correct or help, but that child was invited by you. You consciously conceived that child. You birthed this child gently. In my case, it was not a water birth, it was a fire birth. It was by the fireplace. We should explore birth outside, with the scent of the earth, with the breeze of the air. Water birth is one birth. Fire did it to me. It brought me to that place where I wasn't completely rational. So you're helping a child in a moment of crisis, and even when the child is a teenager. The point of authority from which you speak is an extraordinary point. There is a togetherness between this child and you. You know you're together in this trip, and it counts for the father too. I had never seen a conscious birth before I gave birth myself. I had never seen conscious parenting. Oh my goodness, it simplifies so much, and the beauty that springs from the relationship. We're not here to have other ourselves in the little ones. We're here to foster a child of life into this lifetime. I loved that paradigm. To bring up somebody, you don't know who this person is going to become, but with all that harmony from before conception, you find your strength, you find your inspiration, and life embraces you in that task. Birth is everybody's issue. And then we are going to spend so much money repairing. Look at health care. How much money do we spend for those vital organs like the pancreas or the lungs or the spleen or the intestines being wounded? Let's make it well, this new little human being. We knew breastfeeding was important. In ancient Rome, when a wet nurse would die, on her tomb, the names were written of the children she had breastfed. In the Jewish tradition, I know that when a wet nurse would breastfeed a little boy, and years later a little girl, they were not supposed to get married. They were licked by the power of that milk. It's not that we did not have the information, but somehow society never empowered its women to be pregnant, and not be pregnant as if everything was normal and start education afterwards. You know, the making of a human being is a complex one. We should surrender to that possibility, to that awesome power, and start seeing around the world what can happen when many women are held in sweetness, in tenderness, in love by its society. I even imagine that I don't know, places with great opera singers. Let the pregnant women go for free. Spend the money wisely. Invest in the quality of a pregnancy, especially the joy. Let's stop teaching so much to a pregnant woman. Let's teach our little ones. 12 years old, 14 years old, they can know so much about birth. They can be taught a lot, even about how to give birth, because they can then ponder about how they came into this world. And let women be in their knowing. Every time I tell a pregnant woman what to do, is her baby inside saying, whoops, doesn't mommy know? A baby wants a powerful mother. Many women consider my kind of speech as a disempowering one, because they're used to that power we finally have conquered, to be in a workplace, to be productive, to be chief executive officers of our own enterprises. Well, if they dare looking into this adventure, few things in life can be as empowering as being a mom, a real mother. Now, there is a little trick. When I hold the child in my hands, the child is 2 years old. The little 2-year-old that I once was is absolutely awakened in me. When I am parenting consciously a child, automatically the child I once was is receiving that affection, that tenderness. Most of the time it can be great, but suppose the child in me had something lacking. Suppose the child in me missed on some steps of the affection from the parents. There is repair that gets done. There is psychic repair. And it's the same thing for the father. What we put our mind into teaches us inwardly. And when we're putting our mind into a child development, the child we once were is more healthy, which then frees some energy for us to be more fully who we are. The mothers who have dared that adventure and have reported on Mothering Magazine and other publications, they say that 10, 15 years later, when they go back to the marketplace, perhaps the 2 first weeks are a little bit rocky, but then the amount of intuition, of insights, the way they handle themselves at work, the way they solve creatively some problems is amazing. And now that we have the choice to bring forth children or not, that society looks up to me with or without children the same way, being married or not married the same way, the time is now to dare taking consciously that path of parenting. This is all new. We are being pioneers. And it's a gorgeous way of being a pioneer. It's odd, though, because we've been being born and babies since the very beginning. Perhaps this is the first time where we can relax in our inner knowledge, scientific knowledge, spiritual knowledge, and start applying with lots of humility but great enthusiasm.